Hello, hello. There you go. Did not forget to unmute. Almost did, but I did not forget this time. Welcome back to another cyber live stream. Excited to have what I think is a lot of interest in this topic. I was actually pleasantly surprised to see so many people interested in automating security response in AWS. I think for good reason. It's something that's actually quite difficult to get right, but when you get it right, it's very magical. So hopefully I can help you on your journey to automating security response in AWS today, or even just in the cloud in general. Though this session is going to focus exclusively on AWS, but you can take a lot of what we're talking about today and apply it to other clouds as well, just using various services that those cloud providers would offer to you. So we'll get started in a few minutes here, and we'll start talking about what we're going to build out. We'll look at some diagrams of the entire architecture that we'll set up and how we're going to configure EventBridge, Lambda, SNS, and then also test our system to make sure that it works as expected. And then at the end of the session, so what we'll do is we'll build this out manually in the console. And then at the end of the session, I'll provide you a link to where you can go download Terraform code that deploys all of this pre-made for you that you can customize to your own needs. So a couple of things before I get started. I want to make sure that everybody can hear me okay. Is the audio coming through? You just never know nowadays. Sometimes stuff is breaking. So drop me a thumbs up reaction if you're able to hear me. And then the second thing I want to ask you is, have you used any sort of automation or especially related to security response in the cloud before? Like, have you used EventBridge? Have you used Lambda? Or is this your first time that you'll see EventBridge and Lambda being used or being used together in an environment like this? If you can drop me a comment, just let me know how much experience you have with EventBridge and or with Lambda. That will give me a good gauge of how much time I need to spend explaining what EventBridge is, how it works, and same thing for Lambda. So let me know. Also, thanks for the thumbs up for the audio check. I appreciate that. That's always super helpful. So today we're streaming on both YouTube and LinkedIn, and so I'll keep an eye on comments for both platforms. If you have any questions as we go along, definitely let me know as soon as it pops in your head. That way I can see it on screen and I can add it to what I'm talking about. You don't have to wait until the very end, but also I will also stick around at the end for any questions that you have. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right, but Jawad, thanks for the comment. Glad to hear that it's your first time. I think this is going to be a good session for you. I'll try to spend a little bit more time explaining what the services are and how they work. But I think by the end of this, you'll have a much better handle on it. Awesome. Multiple first timers. Cool. Glad to hear it. Well, I think this will be a good session for you then. Now, the other question I'd have is, what are some other automation flows or processes that you'd particularly be interested in, especially if it could help you on the job? Are there any types of events that you'd be trying to automate that you don't really know how to do? If there are, let me know in the comments too. So what I'll do now is I will switch over to my screen share, make sure everything's working properly there. And if you can drop me another like just to confirm that you're able to see, that is also helpful as well. Sometimes I forget to screen share, so that's never fun. Yeah, okay, a lot of people have not used these services before. That's fantastic. I think you're in the right place then. Okay, so let's get started. We're a couple minutes past. I know we've got some people that might still be joining us, but don't worry if you miss any part of this. This will be available for replay. We've got this streaming on YouTube, and as soon as I'm done streaming, it will automatically post it on YouTube as well. So if you're not subscribed to the Cyber YouTube channel, definitely do that. Not only do you get notified about these all the time, but you also get to access the replays. Cool, thanks for confirming that you're able to see the screen share. We will then get started. Let's do this. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about automating security response with EventBridge and Lambda. We've got a couple other services being used in here as well, but those are really the main stars of the show today. So we're going to start by looking at the overall architectural diagram of what we're going to be building out in this live stream from our lab. And then after that, we'll just dive right in. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the theory. I really want to get hands-on in this session. But here's what's going to happen. We're going to pretend like we have a threat actor, and that threat actor found a way in to one of our production environments, and they want to create a backdoor user in that production environment. So they gain access to credentials somehow, they create that backdoor user, and they're trying to give privileges to that backdoor user. What's going to happen once we set this up is a few things. The first one is a create user event is going to be captured by CloudTrail. So we're going to deploy, or we've got a CloudTrail trail that's deployed. In this case, it's deployed in this particular AWS account, but in production, in an organization, if you're doing multi-account, you'd probably have a centralized trail. Doesn't matter though, it's the same thing. You've got to create user event, and that's what we're going to use. Once that happens, once that gets captured in Amazon EventBridge, we're going to create some stuff that's going to capture that event. So it will get the event from CloudTrail. And then if you're not familiar with EventBridge, a thing you can do in EventBridge is create rules. And these rules can match event patterns. So we can look for specific stuff. In particular, we can look for a create user event. And that rule, once it matches that event pattern, is going to trigger an action. In our case, in this lab, we're going to trigger a Lambda function. You could trigger all kinds of other services. You can even trigger stuff on-prem or in a different cloud service or hitting another API. It doesn't really matter. This is very flexible. But for our particular example, we're going to trigger a Lambda function. And that Lambda function is where a lot of the rest of the magic happens because it's going to do two main things. First, it's going to send a notification via Amazon SNS. So SNS is simple notification service. You can use this to send emails, text messages, stuff like that, or also send messages to other APIs, like to hit Slack or something like that. And so this is a great way to notify your security team that something fishy is going on and that you need to investigate. The other thing it's going to do, and almost or more importantly in this case for automated remediation, is we're going to quarantine that user that got created. And when I say quarantine in this particular case, what we'll do is we will attach a policy to that user that is a deny all policy. So in AWS, when you have deny for all actions and all resources, that will trump all other policies that are on there. So even if our threat actor in this case gave full administrative permissions to this user, by attaching this deny all policy, we're effectively completely cutting that off. And we're making sure that they have zero access in this environment. We could do other stuff with this Lambda. It's fully customizable, but that's the primary action that we'll take with it. This is what we're going to build. Any questions about this at a high level so far? Any thoughts, questions, concerns? Definitely let me know in chat, and I'll use that time to say hello to some of the newcomers. Hey, Salman. Apologies if I'm butchering your names. I am trying here, but welcome to this live stream. I'm not sure if you've been at one of our cyber live streams before, or if this is your first time, but if this is your first time, welcome. Nice to meet you. I'm Christoph, and I appreciate you spending an hour with me today. This is going to be a lot of fun. If you're a repeat viewer, let me know as well. Glad to have you back. I'm glad you're enjoying these live streams. Otherwise, you wouldn't be coming back, right? So thanks for taking the time too. Oh, and I've got somebody on YouTube commenting that they are using my free modules for their first 100 days of cloud security streams. That's awesome. If you want to send me a DM after this, I know you're on YouTube, but if you're not on our Discord, wait until the end. I've got a link for our Discord. But if you want to shoot me a link to where you're documenting this, I'd love to see your journey of cloud security and how that's going. And that's a fantastic idea, by the way. Love the 30 days, 100 days, whatever amount of time you want to do. It's always a really good idea to document that, put that online, and you never know who's going to see it and who will end up hiring you as a result of that. So nice work. Keep it up. All right, we've got another comment that came in. This is a great question. And yes, there are so many ways to do so many things in AWS. This is just one way. If you already have other services you're using, they may actually make this a little bit easier or more complicated, just kind of depends on the service. But the question is there any other AWS service that we can use to achieve this, like AWS detection, et cetera, et cetera? There's services like GuardDuty, for example. So you could use something like GuardDuty that has some threat detection going on. And then with GuardDuty, that can also work directly with EventBridge. So the cool thing about this setup here, and I'll hide this for a second. The cool thing about this setup is this part right here, right, from EventBridge to Lambda, all of that can basically be picked up and dropped somewhere else. What I mean by that is as long as you've got something connected to CloudTrail that also integrates with EventBridge, you can piece it together. Like this is basically a puzzle, and you can make this puzzle work with your current setup. You don't have to have it exactly as I have it here. You could add GuardDuty in the middle, and then GuardDuty could trigger EventBridge, could work with Detective and Security Hub, and so on and so forth. So yeah, multiple ways of doing this. This is just a very, we'll call it bare bones, probably doesn't do it justice, but bare bones plug and play system. The cost of this setup is another question we've got coming through. And that's a good question. This setup is incredibly cheap depending on your situation. Like it depends on if you have multiple trails you're creating. We're creating a new trail here, so that would actually cost you money. But otherwise, if you're not creating a new trail, the trails are free as long as they're not using data events. Like it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm happy to talk to you about pricing and how you can find the information you need after the fact. But pricing in AWS honestly is kind of tricky because it just depends on what you currently have deployed and what you don't. Otherwise, these services here on their own are very cheap. Lambda is based on execution, right? SNS is very affordable. The way that we have EventBridge here would basically be free as well. It just really depends on what else you have in the environment, how you're deploying this, if you're adding anything else to it and whatnot. But as you see it here on this screen, this is extremely, extremely cheap. It would not cost very much money at all. Good question. Let's keep going. Let me go back to my slides for a second, and then we'll dive into the actual environment. Okay, why is this not going? There we go. So our main learning objectives are going to be that we're going to create Lambda functions for automated response and see how we can customize those. We're going to configure EventBridge rules to detect specific security events and look at how to do that. We'll implement user quarantine. And finally, we'll set up our notifications. I've got a bonus down here that says set up automated tests because we do have a Lambda function in this environment that's going to test this setup for us. So we can also look at how we can use that in order to test and make sure everything works, and also how we could set that up on like a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, for example. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to launch my lab on Cyber. This is one of our latest labs. It is a premium lab, so if you're not a Cyber Premium member, you can't launch it yourself, but that's okay. You'll see how I'm able to do it here on the stream, and then you can decide whether it's worth signing up for it or not. We also have plenty of other free labs as well. If you're not interested in spending the money, completely understand, completely up to you. But if you are interested in launching the lab, that link will take you to this page right here, and I'll send this slideshow after the fact, so you'll have direct access to the link. And once you launch the lab, you'll get access to these credentials here. So you can click to copy this URL. You can open that up in a separate tab, and it will take you straight to the landing page for logging in. Go back here, grab the username, paste that in, and then go back here and paste in the password, and then press enter. And we're not going to save that because it's ephemeral. It will get erased after this. We will land on this AWS dashboard right here, and we're now ready to get started with the lab. Real quick, if you're not super familiar with Cyber's hands-on labs, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see some walkthroughs. So here we have a video walkthrough kind of going through what I'll be going through today. And then below that, we have our text-based walkthrough. And I mentioned that here because this is a step-by-step guide that is going to follow what we're doing today. And there are some code examples in here that we will be copying and pasting. So if you are following this after the live stream, like for example here, you've got the Lambda function code and everything you need to make this work. So just mentioning that, I've got that set up on my other screen, but that way you know where I'm copying and pasting from. So the first thing that we'll do is actually going a little bit backwards. What I mean by that is we'll start by configuring Amazon SNS, and then we'll take a look at the Lambda function, and then we'll take a look at EventBridge. So it's kind of going backwards. Whoops, did not mean to do that. Let's go back to our screen, and let's head over to Amazon SNS. We'll click on Simple Notification Service, and then we'll go over to Topics. So we've pre-created a security alerts topic in this environment that we can click on. And once we've clicked on that, we notice that there are no subscriptions. So we need to create this subscription so we can receive our notifications. And as soon as I do that, we are given an ARN, and then we can select our protocol. So when I said you can send all kinds of different notifications, this is what I meant here. You've got SMS, Platform Application Endpoint, HTTPS, email, Lambda, SQS, etc., etc. But what we care about here is going to be email. So we'll just select the protocol of email, and then we'll pass in whatever email or endpoint we want to use here. This could be security@cyber.com if we've got a security group for our security team. It could be a specific individual. It's completely up to you and your organization here. In this case, I'll just do my personal email, and then I'll click on Create Subscription. Now, what's really important with SNS for anti-spam laws is we have to confirm. So you'll see here that it shows pending confirmation. So what I have to do in a separate window, because you already know what email looks like, so I don't think I need to show you that part, but you will receive a notification via your email that asks you to subscribe to this. So I'll pull it up, I'll find the email, I'll click on it, and then I will click on Confirm Subscription. And the moment that I do that, I can now refresh on this side over here. And we will see that it now says confirmed. So we are good to go. If you don't do this step, you will not receive notifications via SNS. Again, this is for anti-spam stuff. Before we move on, I will copy the ARN of this topic because we're going to need it for our Lambda function. So let me open up my notes and I will save this ARN for just in a minute. But now that we've got SNS set up, now we can go to our Lambda service. And this is where a lot of the magic's going to start happening. This is where it gets more fun. So first you'll notice we have our attack simulation. This is what we'll use to test this and make sure that it works. Ignore this for now. Instead, we're going to create a brand new function. And we will author this function from scratch. Now, quick disclaimer here. If you are not familiar with Lambda, I'm going to go kind of fast through this. But don't worry, next week I've got a live stream where we will create Lambda functions from scratch at the beginner level. So I'll spend a lot more time explaining what's going on and how this works. So if I'm losing you here, definitely tune in to next week's webinar and live stream where we will be doing this at a much slower pace. I will name this function security response. And then for the runtime, I'm going to use Python. You could use Node.js if you prefer, but you would have to basically translate the code that I'm giving you. And then for the default execution role, if in your own environment and account, you would have to create a brand new role here, but instead we've pre-created one for you just for the sake of time. And you will click on use an existing role, and then you'll go to security response Lambda role. All this is really doing is it's giving you access to CloudWatch so we can write logs to CloudWatch. It's giving you access to IAM so you can add that quarantine and enumerate users and things like that. It's just got some of those permissions that are needed in order for the Lambda function to properly work. But that's it. Now we can click on create function and we've got a Lambda function. Before I move forward and change the code of this function, any questions about what I've done so far? Any questions about SNS or the Lambda? So we've got a question that says, how fast does the policy take effect? Great question. Here's the thing to remember about CloudTrail. So if I go back to my diagram for a sec, when this happens here, the create user event in CloudTrail is not real time. This is a CloudTrail limitation. CloudTrail is near real time. It is not real time, meaning that this right here could take up to a few minutes, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. Sometimes it's super, super fast, like within a minute. Other times it's 5 minutes. In extreme cases, it's closer to 15. So this is not going to happen the exact second that the threat actor creates the backdoor user. This is just an AWS limitation. Unless you have a service that's real time that I don't know about, then you can't really get around that. But that's still going to be a whole lot faster than human intervention, because human intervention would still rely on CloudTrail. So you're still talking about up to 15 minutes. Then the human has to get the notification, go in, investigate, blah, blah, blah. That would still probably take 30 minutes or an hour, right? In this case, this entire flow at the upper end is probably 20 minutes, but more realistically, it's probably like 5 to 7 minutes or so. So it's much, much faster, but definitely still not going to be real time. For the role policies, we can definitely look at that afterwards. For now, I won't show them just yet, but we can definitely pull that up after. No worries at all. If I forget, definitely remind me at the end, because that's a good question. Yes, this is being recorded. So you will, if you want the recording, you can go on YouTube and find Cyber and subscribe to us there, and you'll be able to watch the stream again. Okay, cool. So now that we have our Lambda function, we've got to configure it. So if we scroll down a little bit, you'll notice that we have some default code. We're going to take all of this and delete it. We don't care about it. That's just what AWS adds by default. Instead, I'm going to copy and paste the code that was on the lab page that I mentioned before. So let me go back to the lab page just for a second. Again, this is, you have to have a premium account for this, but basically you'd have to go to the lab guide and copy it. I am going to provide the Terraform code after the fact that you can download, and that Terraform code will also include this. So even if you're not a premium member, you will be able to get access to this, just as an FYI, because I don't expect you to type this manually line by line. That would be insanity. But we will copy and paste this code in here. I'll briefly explain what it does, but first I want to click on deploy to make sure I don't forget to save my changes. This will deploy the new code to the Lambda function. So now our Lambda function can execute this. But basically what we're looking at here, zooming in just a little bit, is this Lambda function is going to receive the event from EventBridge, and EventBridge will receive it from CloudTrail. But once Lambda receives the event, we're going to grab all those details from that event. And then if the event name matches create user, then we're going to take action on that. So let me go back to the lab guide just for a second, because I want to show you that I'm not making this up on the fly. Instead, this is what the CloudTrail event would look like. So when a create user event happens, CloudTrail would print this out in its trail, and this is what we're tapping into. So we have an event source of IAM-AMAZON-AWS.com with an event name of create user. So when I go back to my Lambda function, that's what I'm looking for here. If the event name equals create user, then we detected that a create user event happened. And so we want to take action for it. We want to grab what that user is or who that user is. Then we want to grab our quarantine policy. And this policy is pre-deployed in the environment as well. It's called automated security quarantine, but it's literally just a deny all. So deny asterisk, resource asterisk, deny everything so that this user cannot do anything at all. And then we will attach that policy to that user that's been detected. And finally, we will also add some tags to that user. So we'll add a key of security status of quarantined. The quarantine reason is set to automated response to suspicious user creation. And then we'll also set the quarantine time. So when this executed, which is the current date and time. So tags like this are really nice to add, especially to quarantine resources, because then we can query that. We can keep a log and trail of that, of what's going on, why it was quarantined, who quarantined it, when was it quarantined, and so on and so forth. So I always recommend creating this sorts of tags. Of course, you can customize them however you like. So that's all that's going to happen for the user action. But then once the user actions are completed, we want to send our SNS notification. So this is going to be the alert template, and we'll see it in our inbox whenever we receive it. But basically we're passing in our event details, and then we're also passing in the automated response, which is our quarantine, and then the next steps. So in here, what's cool is you can fully customize it. You can link to internal documentation or whatever, so that when the security team receives that notification, they can click on the link, it opens up a playbook, and they can follow that playbook, but also it gives them some very high level next steps of what they need to do. So fully customizable, but a really good starting point. And this is the logic that will push that message over to our SNS topic. You'll notice here that we have os.environ for environment. This is an environment variable that's expected from us. That's going to be called SNS topic ARN. So we have to configure this so that the Lambda function knows where to send this or where to publish this notification to. So let's add that next. I'll go ahead and copy this value right here. I'll scroll up and we'll go to configuration. And under configuration, you'll find environment variables. So we'll click on that, and then we can click on edit. We'll then click on add environment variable. We'll pass in the key, and then the value is going to be that ARN that I told you that I would be copying before. So this was grabbed from the SNS service. This is our SNS topic ARN. We'll go ahead and click on save. And just like that, now the Lambda function knows exactly which SNS topic we want to publish to when this triggers. So that basically concludes the Lambda portion for now. We'll come back to it just for one more action in just a moment. But for now, we've got our Lambda function that's almost fully configured. We're now ready to move on to EventBridge. Before I do that, any questions about this so far? Question is, will it also detect the user who created the new backdoor account? So that's a really good addition. I would definitely add that in as well. In the current setup, it does not. Although I say that, actually, I think it does. Let's go back and let's take a look. Yeah, I think it actually does. I got that wrong. So if we go back to our code really quickly and we look at the event stuff, we're grabbing it. I'm just not sure that we're doing anything with it in the email, but that would be a very easy addition. So here we get the details of the event, we get the event name, and then we get user identity. This might be, I need to double check. I can't remember if this grabs the actual person that triggered this or if it's going to grab the created user. No, it's going to grab the identity that triggered this. That's right. Because then under the response element, that's going to be our suspicious user created. So in this case, we are grabbing both the person that is triggering this, the identity that's triggering this, and we're also grabbing the username that's being created as well. I just don't remember if we're doing anything with it in particular, but you could absolutely customize that as well. We even have the source IP address, we have the event time, and we have the region as well. You can grab other stuff from the event. That's just what I decided to grab from this event here. But whatever shows up in CloudTrail, you can pass on to the Lambda function as well, and then you can do whatever logic you want to do with it. So yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. Perfect. So let me know if you have any questions on that further, but otherwise we will head over to the EventBridge service. Click on that. Now, EventBridge, if you've not used it before, it's a beast of a service. You can do a ton with it. It's also a well-named service, which I can't say of that for all AWS services, if I'm being frank. But in this case, I feel like this is a really good name because it tells you exactly what it does. It bridges events, and it bridges them between services in AWS or even outside of AWS, and it's serverless. So you can deploy all kinds of things through EventBridge without needing to manage a single server. We're only going to be talking about buses and rules in this lesson or in this live stream, but we've got all kinds of stuff like pipes, we've got schedulers, integrations, and other stuff as well. But instead, we're going to head over straight to rules. Once I'm on this page for rules, you'll notice that we can select an event bus. Right now, there's a default event bus, and every single AWS account by default has a default event bus. That's just how the accounts get created. But you can create multiple different buses if you want to. And in fact, I would recommend doing that. In this case, I'm not going to do it because we're not doing anything else in this lab. But if I were doing security stuff and then other operational stuff, I may want to separate that out as completely separate buses. And you can create these various buses in your account. But instead, I will just select the default event bus. And that's what's going to capture all those events that we can then create rules on. So we'll click on create rule, and then we're able to create a rule that's going to use this default event bus. If you were to create a completely different bus for your own environment, then you would instead select that different event bus. You don't have to use the default one. Now, I've got a couple of weird quirks in this lab in particular where we need to name things a certain way for the policies to work properly. So make sure you follow the lab guide if you're doing this as well in your own environment. But I'm going to make sure that I'm grabbing the correct EventBridge rule name here. So it's going to be detect IAM create user. So what we'll do is we'll name it detect IAM create user just to be descriptive. If you're detecting other types of things or if you're making this broader, then you could name it differently. But in this case, we're just looking for create user. So this name will make sense. And then for the description, I'll just copy and paste from the lab guide to save some time, which is just saying detects IAM create user events for automated security, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to modify anything else. This is not a masterclass on EventBridge. We do have some content in our courses for EventBridge. So if you want a little bit more depth, we can definitely do either a live stream on this or check out that content as well. Now under events, we can select an event source. So in this case, our source is going to be CloudTrail. So we want it to be AWS events or EventBridge partner events, but we can also do all sorts of other things with EventBridge, which is really cool. And then instead of using a pattern form or schema, we're going to use a custom pattern. And then I'll copy and paste this and we'll talk about it for a sec. So I'll scroll down a little bit, and in this box, I will paste in our event pattern that we want to use. So here we are setting the source as AWS IAM, the IAM service. We're adding detail type of AWS API call via CloudTrail. And then under details, we're setting our event source again to be iam.amazonaws.com for the IAM service. And then the event name to be create user. And that matches what we see here from the CloudTrail event. We have our event source, and then we have our event name. So that's what this rule is going to filter for and look for via CloudTrail. If it sees this, as the CloudTrail logs are streaming in, then it will match that event, and then it will trigger something down the road. So that's what this pattern right here does. Let's click on next and you'll see what I mean. So next we can select those targets that I was talking about. Under targets, you could do all sorts of things. You can have multiple different targets, although in this case, we only need one. But you could select another event bus. If you have multiple buses, you can pass stuff along. You can set up an API destination if you want to, or in this case, we want to use an AWS service because we're going to want to trigger our Lambda function that we just created. Also, you can modify the location. So if this is multi-account, like if you have a security tooling account, for example, then you could set this to be target in another AWS account. But in this case, we have our EventBridge rule in the same account as the Lambda function, so we can leave the default selected here. Then we'll click on the function and make sure that we select security response, not attack simulation, because we want to target our security response function instead of the attack simulation one. Next, we need to set up permissions because we need to tell EventBridge that it has access to the Lambda function. So you could do a couple things here. Either you could check this off and it will automatically do it for you, or you can choose to create or choose to use an execution role, and you can create a brand new one, and this will set the proper permissions for EventBridge to be able to invoke this Lambda function, and AWS will configure this policy for you. So that's the recommended option, and that's what I'll do today, and it's going to generate this role name right here. Cool. Okay, so we could also go to the next page. We could add tags if we wanted to. I'm not going to do that because this is just through the console. Ideally, we're doing this through IAC, and then we'd add tags through there. We can review, and then we can click on Create Rule. So now we see that our rule got created. We even have an ARN, all that good stuff. We'll come back to this in a moment, but we're done with EventBridge just for a second. Instead, I'll open up a completely separate tab, and we'll go back to Lambda. But as I do that, I should probably pause for questions here because we kind of went through that quickly. Are there any questions so far about the EventBridge side as we start to wrap this up here? Any questions about how I created the EventBridge rule, what a rule is, how it's configured, any of that? All right, let me know if you have questions. I'm not seeing any on EventBridge so far, so hopefully that's a good sign. Hopefully I didn't lose you on that. And then we'll go back to Lambda. So I said there was one more thing we had to do here. And the reason for that is because it's kind of weird, but when we create that execution role, for some reason, AWS doesn't automatically add the trigger to the Lambda function. I feel like they should do that behind the scenes, and they do that if you don't check that box. So I don't know why it doesn't do it when you do check the box. It's kind of weird, but it doesn't matter. All we have to do is come back to the Lambda dashboard, and then we can add a trigger ourselves. So you'll see here, we can either add a trigger or add a destination. In this case, we want EventBridge to trigger this. So we'll click on Add Trigger. And then for the source, we can just search for EventBridge. Now this, a few years back, was called CloudWatch Events. They still haven't updated it. This is really EventBridge. It's a totally different service now. It used to be part of CloudWatch. That's why they display that in case you're curious. And then we could have either created a new rule from here, or because we already have that rule that we just created, we can click inside of existing rules and we can select the one that we just created, and it'll auto-populate the ARN for us. Then it will show that event pattern that we generated earlier, which matches what we had, so we're good. And then we click on Add. And the moment we do that, we'll see the success message. And now we can see that EventBridge is properly configured to trigger this function. And this is going to connect the dots between EventBridge, the execution policy, the trigger, and the Lambda function. Also, it will have added under configuration and the permissions tab, it will have added this resource-based policy statement to make sure that EventBridge, and in particular this rule, is able to trigger this function. So we have an ARN-like AWS source ARN for that rule that we just created. So all the permission stuff is good to go and is making sure that all the services are able to talk to each other without running into permissions issues. This is where a lot of the EventBridge complexity comes from, in my opinion, is not only matching the patterns, like figuring out what that looks like, but then also making sure it has the proper permissions to call your other services. That's where things can get a little bit operationally intensive and kind of hard to troubleshoot. But in this case, we are good to go. Everything permission-wise should be set up properly. Any questions about this so far? All right, we've got a couple questions. Let's see. So the first one is, will it flag and quarantine every newly created user or the users created with specific policies, as there could be a legit create user event? Yes, great question. And this kind of ties in to security automation as well. So the problem with security automation, the reason it's kind of a quote unquote unicorn and so many people chase it, but fewer people manage to pull it off, is because if you don't do it right, you can cause production outages, either customer facing outages or internal team outages. Because in this case, it will match every single user. So if you deploy this in dev environments, staging environments, and production environments, and in your dev environments, your people still use users, which they shouldn't, but we'll come back to that in a second, then it will prevent them from doing their job, because this will block every single user. If you want to tweak that, you can, and you would do that via the Lambda function. So in that Lambda function, when we are looking at the create event, so let's go back to it for a sec. So if we search for create user here, when we are matching that event, so if event name is create user, then you could always print that out, but you could check to see what sorts of policies are associated with it, what kinds of names are associated. Like, you can decide what organizational filters you want to put in place to allow legitimate creation of users while preventing all the other ones. Like maybe you have an allow list or a deny list, or maybe you're looking for specific policies or tags, or like if it's missing tags, then quarantine it. If it's not missing tags, don't quarantine. Like there's all kinds of customization you can do here. But my first question would be, why? Why do you need users? Because ideally you're not using users ever at all, even in your dev environments. Ideally, you're moving towards using Identity Center with permission sets. So you're not creating IAM users in that case, you're creating permission sets, and your Identity Center users are able to assume those roles through the permission sets, in which case this would not affect that at all, because this is only looking for IAM create user events. Now, if your organization's not there yet, and you're still having to use users in the short term, then that's fair. Maybe this doesn't work for you, or you need more customization. But I would very seriously look at, why are we still using IAM users, and how can we get rid of those completely, except for maybe one or two that are used for emergency situations only as our break glass users. So really good question. Thanks for asking. The second question we have is, in a multi-account setup, say across dev, test, and prod, how do you make sure that suspicious activity in one account doesn't slip over into others before automation reacts? So I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, so let me ask and clarify. But I think what you're asking is, if you have a multi-account setup and say a threat actor gets access to your dev environment, how do you make sure that they're not able to go to another account before the automation reacts? Well, ideally, you've got some multiple layers of security that make this extremely hard to achieve. So even if they get into the dev environment, they would still have to spend some time to try and get to the other environments, and either they can't because you've got those security layers in place, or even if they are able to do it, it would take them more than 15 minutes, which is kind of that maximum before this kicks in. And so what I would say to that is, this should react quickly enough to where it'd be very difficult for them to be able to find that entry point into the other accounts, unless you just have zero security controls and you make it very easy for them to hop to that other account, in which case you're at the mercy of how quickly this responds. But again, what's your alternative, right? The alternative is you have human intervention, and human intervention is going to be 3 to 10 times as long. So ideally, you've got those multiple layers of security that prevent that make that extremely hard for the threat actor to achieve very quickly. And in the meantime, this kicks in and locks them out. If you're asking more about like, how do you deploy this multi-account, then that's a larger conversation, and that would be a great next step for this project once you get that Terraform code. How do I take this and how do I turn it into multi-account? And my overall answer, without knowing the rest of your environment, would be that ideally you have that centralized logging with CloudTrail, and then you have that security tooling account. That security tooling account is going to have some of this EventBridge stuff in there. It's also going to have some of these Lambda functions that are pre-created and ready to react. And so it's all just kind of working together, and it's looking at all of your various accounts, because we have that centralized logging. So even if it happens in account Z, CloudTrail will have that in the centralized logging that will push to EventBridge, that will push to your Lambda function, that will have the proper permissions to react in account Z or account A or C or whatever. This can also work just as well multi-account. You just have to tweak and customize the template to make it work that way. Hopefully that answers the question. If I got it wrong, definitely let me know. Happy to dive deeper into that. All right. Fantastic questions, by the way. Thank you so much. I love it. These are so much more fun. These live streams are so much more fun when we have great questions like this. So thank you for contributing and making this more interesting for everybody. I appreciate the questions. All right. So on that note, let me remember where we left off. We were talking about permissions. We added the trigger. Okay, so I think we're actually ready to test this. Let me triple check. We should have everything we need. Yeah, we're good to go. So now that we've got the rule, now that we've got the SNS configured, and now that we have our trigger set up for this Lambda function, let's go ahead and test this and make sure that it works. So I'll go ahead and open up Cloud Shell. If you've not used Cloud Shell before, it's a web-based shell environment directly in AWS that assumes whatever permissions your role or user has. So I'm authenticated as this user right now. This Cloud Shell is going to have the exact same permissions that this user has, which is really convenient, so you don't have to whip up the AWS CLI if you just want to run some quick commands. If we go back to the lab guide for a sec, we've got a command in here that we can copy and paste. So it's going to be down here where it says test your automation with run the attack simulation. Here we have AWS invoke. So I'll copy and paste this and then we'll explain it. So I'll paste this in here and press enter. It'll take a couple of seconds. So what we're doing here is we are invoking a Lambda function, but this time we're invoking our attack simulation function. So if you remember, if we go back to our functions here, you'll remember that we have our attack simulation function right here. That's the one that I'm calling with this fancy little magic here. But basically, I'm not passing in any sort of payload because this doesn't require a payload. It's already fully configured as is. Instead, I'm just grabbing the response and then outputting that response with cat response.json. We get a status code of 200, which means it succeeded. And then we executed the latest version of that. So that means that at this point, it actually created this username. What's odd, though, is as I remembered, I think it outputted the username itself. So I wonder why it didn't do that in this execution. Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why it didn't execute, or maybe I erased it accidentally. I'm not entirely sure, like when I swapped tabs. But when you run this in your environment, it should output this as well. If not, you can just re-output the response.json, and it will show you the exact username that was created. So in this case, we have randomized names and then characters after that. So we created a username service dash and then random characters. It confirmed that the attack simulation completed successfully, and it also shows us when it was created. So like I said before, this can take a couple of minutes, but let me pull up my phone and let's see if I've already received the notification or not. So I'll pull this up and we'll take a look. And we'll see. I don't think I've received it just yet. So instead, what we can do in the meantime, while this is executing, is first, we can close out Cloud Shell so it gets out of our way. And then we can do a couple of things. We can take a look at monitor in Lambda. And it will show us if it's been invocated, if it's been executed. If so, how long it took to execute. If there were any errors versus successes. So in this case, we had a success, which is good. We can look at whether we got throttled, all sorts of other metrics here. We can also click on View CloudWatch Logs. And if we go under there, it will show us whatever it's outputted to this log group. So we scroll down to the log stream, we click on that log stream, and we can see all the different actions. This is really hard to see when you're zoomed in like 1000%, so you guys can see on my screen. So I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit. Sorry if it's hard to read, but I can't see it if I don't do that. But basically we can see here that we did detect the create user event for that matching user that we created. It shows that it's been automatically quarantined. However, it failed to send notification. That's why I haven't received it. Interesting. Invalid parameter. So it looks like I screwed something up as I was going through the demo, which is typical. So in this case, a couple of things. First of all, this is why you want to have CloudTrail permissions for your Lambda functions, because if you don't have this, you can't troubleshoot. You can't figure out what went wrong or what happened. In this case, everything worked except for the SNS topic, and it tells you, hey, there's an invalid parameter of topic name. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this is happening, but that gives me an indication of where I can start troubleshooting at. The second thing is if you scroll back up, we can view even more information about the CloudTrail event. So in our code, we're outputting a lot of the event stuff. So we can see, the source, the account, the time, region, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can see that principle. Somebody was asking about this earlier, where we want to figure out who made this user, like what identity has been compromised that's creating this backdoor. Well, here we can see that our attack simulation Lambda role was used. And if we investigate that with Athena, with CloudTrail Lake, or our SIEM, whatever we're using for incident response investigation, we would be able to trace this role assumption here back to that Lambda function. And that would give us the root identity that triggered this backdoor creation event. We can see the exact account ID. So if this is multi-account, then this would help us figure out exactly which account it's in. We can also see, the type of identity. So in this case, it's a role, not a user. Again, we've got the ARN, the account. Like some of this starts repeating itself, but we can see whether they're MFA authenticated, the issuer type of Lambda function, the credentials issued to that Lambda function as well. Like this is a treasure trove of information that helps us get to the root of the situation. And then we've got the actual quarantine action that shows us what tags were added, when they were added, and so on and so forth. If I head over to IAM and we go to this service here and then click on users, then we'll see that we still have the user. It hasn't been deleted yet, but if we click on that user, we'll be able to see our automated security quarantine. So this is that denial policy that's been attached to this user. And if I remember correctly, this Lambda function also removed the other policies, not strictly required, frankly, because this denial would override those anyway, but you can always either leave it or remove it. It really doesn't make a difference in terms of what we're achieving here. And if we go over to the tags, we'll see our security status of quarantined, our quarantine reason of automated response to suspicious user creation, our quarantine time, and then our purpose, attack simulation, created by attack simulation. So the attack simulation scripts are also adding their own tags, so we can easily track those and make sure that it's legitimate, and then the created date as well. So we've confirmed that. The last thing I'll show you here is going to be the EventBridge stuff, the monitoring stuff for that. So we'll go back to that rule that we created, and then we'll go over to monitor. And here we can also see what's going on. So we can see the matched events. We had one matched event, the invocations. We've got triggered rules. So this is what shows us that it triggered the Lambda function. And we have no failed invocations. So if you have an issue between EventBridge and the Lambda function, then you would see the failed invocation here, and then you can troubleshoot from there. We've got stuff like end-to-end latency, like how long this took, and so on and so forth. So each step is going to add a little bit of latency, but as you can see in this case, it's very minimal. We're talking about 134 milliseconds of added latency. So very, very minimal. Definitely a lot faster than a human could react to this. You can also explore this stuff in CloudWatch, right? These are CloudWatch metrics. So you can also set up alarms for this. Like if you want to look for failed invocations, you could create an alarm metric that shows you that. If you're not familiar with CloudWatch and that stuff, we did a live stream on this last week that would show you exactly how to achieve this. So I would definitely check that out. Cool. This worked minus the SNS thing, which we might have a couple minutes to try and troubleshoot. But any questions so far about this? Yeah, I've got a good comment in here. It says, as stated in the Cyber Lab, the key is starting simple and gradually building more sophisticated detection and response capabilities. Highly recommend that, especially for if you're adding remediation. Start very, very small. Start in sandbox environments. Bring in your teams that might be impacted by this. Test it, iterate, test, iterate, and keep doing that until you get something that works, and then put it into production, because otherwise you may end up breaking stuff for your teams or your customers and have some angry teams. Let's see what this says here. Lambda also has aliases and versions. You can label as dev, prod, staging. Absolutely, yeah. You can use Lambda layers for global dependencies. You can zip up the entire Lambda function. Yeah, no, Lambda is very very flexible with that. Like I said, if you're interested in more Lambda stuff, next week we've got a live stream that will talk about some of these things in there. Okay, we're running a little bit low on time. Let me check how much time I even have left in this lab environment. It might shut down on me. Okay, we've got 12 minutes. Maybe you can try to figure out what the SNS issue is. But as I'm doing that, any more questions? Any feedback on the presentation? Actually, let's do a quick recap before we do all that. I know recaps have been asked for in the past. I think they're very helpful. So let me go back to my slides just for, what am I doing? Just for a second. So quick recap here as we start wrapping up. First things first, we triggered our attack simulation. That's what happened when I pulled up Cloud Shell and called that Lambda function that was the pre-created Lambda function. So it created a suspicious and fictitious IAM user for us. When that happened, CloudTrail logged the event, because we have a trail in this account, that captured the create user API call and all the relevant metadata, of course. It happened very quickly in this case, but it could take 5 to 15 minutes. Then the EventBridge that we created, that rule that we created, fired. So with the pattern matching for our create user API call, it detected the suspicious user creation. And because we set up our target trigger to be the Lambda function, it automatically invoked that Lambda function. Because it had proper permissions, that Lambda function executed successfully. It grabbed the IAM user that was created. It applied that quarantine policy to the user. It added the tags, and then it was supposed to send the SNS notification, but I screwed something up along the way. So it should have delivered the alert, but as I was talking and multitasking, I screwed that up. So now we have to troubleshoot this and figure out why this is not working and then get that working properly. But from start to finish, once you have this deployed in your environment, that's essentially what would happen. A quick note I forgot to mention here is, for the simulations, I do recommend that you test these periodically, because you just never know. Infrastructure drifts, services change, permissions change, whatever. And so 6 months down the road, maybe you think you have this covered, maybe you think this is working properly, but something ended up breaking it along the way that you had no visibility into. So I would highly recommend periodically testing your automated remediation to make sure that it works as expected. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend deploying that Lambda function to production and keeping that in there all the time. I would instead, of course, test that in dev and staging as well. If you want to test this stuff in production, if that's something you feel comfortable doing because you've got it honed down so well, what you could do is you could deploy those tests, let's say quarterly or every 6 months or whatever time frame you want, and deploy those Lambda test functions and then schedule them, run them, and then delete them, right? I wouldn't necessarily recommend keeping those in production all the time. You could keep them in dev if you want to, but those are really meant to just be used that one time to test and then periodically after that. That's what I would mention about that as well. Any questions on that? Makes sense? Did I lose you at any point? Like, please don't be embarrassed to mention if it's not making sense, it's not clicking. That actually gives me feedback on how I can improve these live streams. So if I lost you along the way, if I went too fast in certain sections, definitely let me know on that. If it made a lot of sense, drop me a thumbs up so I know that it made sense and I'm not just going crazy. And then I'll keep answering some questions and then we'll wrap up here in the next 7 minutes. And then I'll figure out the SNS topic or issue. All right, so we've got a question that says, how can Terraform be used to have this setup done? Any modules existing or references? Absolutely. So that's the next step. And I've got building beyond this lab. I'll come back to this in a second. So if you want to deploy this with IAC, with Terraform in particular, I've got this template you can download for free. Just go to this URL or scan that QR code. It's got a landing page, enter your email, and it will give you the download link. I did not set this up as modules because I want it to be fully customizable. So instead, it's just Terraform files, and that deploys exactly what we did today. But you can modify the TF vars, and you can go in and add your own email. You can add your own names. All that stuff is customizable. So you can open up that template, and you can modify it however you want to. You can modify the event pattern. Like literally everything that you see in this diagram here is going to be deployed with this Terraform template here. So you can download that directly from there, open it up. You can use an LLM if you're not super familiar with Terraform, play around with it, have it answer questions about how to run it. But it's very straightforward, very easy, and fully customizable as well. I would definitely recommend doing that. Michael, did you accept the SNS email? Yeah, I did. So if you don't accept it, then it wouldn't necessarily error out. You just wouldn't receive the email. So what's more likely, I'm trying to remember what the error message was, but it was something to do with the topic name. So I might have actually screwed up the Lambda function when I was copying and pasting and showing you guys around with Command F. I might have actually screwed something up. But when we added, when we added the SNS topic ARN, that my guess is probably when I screwed it up, because I think it was the topic name that wasn't working right. So when the Lambda function tried to publish to the SNS topic, something went wrong. So I probably typoed the environment variable, or I screwed up the ARN when I copied and pasted, added that extra character. Whatever it was, I did it live. The lab guide will work. I've gone through that lab guide probably a dozen times to make sure it's good to go through QA. So whatever you do through the lab guide will work. If not, just drop me a comment. But it's most likely a typo or something that I did when I was multitasking. But yes, definitely accept the SNS stuff, because otherwise you will not receive it. Feedback. Thank you for the feedback. It says, overall, I thought it was a great hands-on lab and walkthrough. I like to see the troubleshooting portion, and having the ISC is going to be handy. A CloudFormation version would be great too. Yes, so on that note, if I go back to the lab guide here, and we scroll all the way down, there's a lot of content here, but if we scroll down, we've got some troubleshooting stuff. So I should probably add one about SNS now. That's funny. We've got a lot of troubleshooting EventBridge issues that I'd recommend you look at. So for example, if EventBridge shows no matches, probably just you have to wait, right? Wait up to 15 minutes, set a timer. If you still don't get stuff after 15 minutes, there's probably a problem with your event pattern or with CloudTrail and the trail that you're using. If the user gets created but did not get quarantined, you can do this. If you don't get any execution, here's what I recommend you look at. If it shows failed invocations, here's what I recommend you look at. And after this live stream, I'm going to add one. Here's what happens if you get a failure with SNS topics once I get to the root cause of this issue. Though I'm about to lose the lab because it's ephemeral, it's going to shut down in a second. So hopefully I'm able to replicate this issue. If not, just assume that it was a typo, because that's probably exactly what it was. The CloudFormation version, yeah, I could probably look at adding that. Frankly, though, if you're using CloudFormation, I would strongly urge you not to. Trust me, I use CloudFormation on a weekly basis. It sucks. I'm sorry if anybody from AWS that works on that team is listening to this. I don't mean to be rude about it. It is an awful service. You guys kind of screwed the pooch on that one. Terraform, I would use that first, or OpenTofu if you want the true open source equivalent of Terraform. You can also look at something like Pulumi. CDK is better than CloudFormation by miles. Still not great though. But if you're using raw CloudFormation, man, I would highly encourage you to use a far superior tool. So I probably won't do the CF version just for that purpose, or that reason, I mean. Hey, that's a good idea. Yeah, a power hour session on troubleshooting. That's a great idea. I love that, actually. I wonder how many people would tune into that, because that might be, I don't know. I kind of assumed that would be pretty boring just watching me troubleshoot stuff, but I don't know. Maybe that's the opposite. Maybe people would enjoy that. So I might try that as live stream. Let me make a note of that. Great suggestion. Thank you. So yeah, folks, as we wrap up here, first of all, thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for the fantastic engagement. I had a ton of fun with this live stream today, so that just made my day. Thank you. Quick question and also some conclusion stuff there. If you want to join us on Discord, you can reach me there. You can DM and reach other community members as well. We've got a few thousand in there. It's a great community. You can also follow me on LinkedIn if you're not already with that QR code. I'm very active on there. Live stream every week, post every week. Also check out the YouTube. But the question I want to ask as we wrap up here, because I got that great suggestion, is what other automation stuff would you want me to live stream about? Like, what should I live stream after this? What are you interested in seeing more of? I've got that Lambda live stream that's coming up. I've got a couple others that are scheduled. Let me see. What else do I have? That's the only one I've got scheduled right now, but I've got a few behind the scenes that I'm going to start scheduling shortly here. So we've got intro to serverless, deploying your first AWS Lambda function. And then also, what else do I have that's planned? Where is Obsidian? There it is. So I also want to walk through the new AWS Security Hub, because they launched AWS Security Hub, which replaced the prior AWS Security Hub that's now called CSPM. Super confusing. AWS, why are you doing this to us? But I will be doing something on that probably. I also want to do something about cloud security resumes, projects, like what are some projects you could do to add to your resume, and maybe some more Terraform stuff. I've done some Terraform live streams before. They've been popular, so I might do that again. I've got a couple of potential collabs with people I might do, so that'd be fun. Maybe something on Bedrock. What are some other suggestions? What other things would you want to hear me live stream about? Yep, Security Hub, that's a good one. Networking. Networking is a good one. I suck and hate networking and suck at it. So I probably should force myself to do that, but good suggestion. Yeah, I still need to spend time with the new Security Hub too. I'm hesitant to create content on it, like permanent content, because they're probably going to change a lot since it's an early preview. But I still need to go through it, and I feel like setting up a live stream for that will force me to go through and compare and contrast with the Security Hub CSPM. So I'll probably end up doing that. Question about, do you have anything on AWS IAM projects? Can you be more specific with that? Like, what do you mean by IAM projects? For example, we have a full course on IAM privilege escalation labs. So if you go to cyber.com/courses, we've got this entire course here that's going to walk through AWS IAM privilege escalation labs techniques. So I'd recommend going through that. We also have a roles course. So that one's going to be a practical guide to AWS IAM roles. But if you have a more specific project in mind, definitely let me know. We can also look at that. Generative AI. Okay, cool. Like maybe some Bedrock, Gen AI stuff. Strands. Yeah, Strands is cool. Agent Core. These are awesome suggestions. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. And then the Powerhouse session on troubleshooting. Detection engineering. Okay, yeah. Detection engineering using AWS. Kind of a good continuation of this conversation here. Awesome. Well, thank you for the suggestions. This is a great way to end this session. If you have any other ones, let me know. I'm all ears, and I'm going to be doing these every week, so I definitely need some ideas. Hope to see you next week. Like I said, you can go to, if you're following me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see it. But otherwise, you can also go to luma. And of course, I'm not logged in because it's on a different page, so hold on. Calendars. Let me share the calendars instead so you can see it. And if you follow us on there, you will be notified as we publish new events. I'm also going to share this slideshow so you can access the links on there. Where's the link? Copy link. So that way you can access both of these resources and you can follow our journey on other live streams. Let me share them on YouTube as well. So any other suggestions or thoughts, concerns, comments, anything, reach out on LinkedIn DMs or Discord DMs. That's where I'm the most active. And then if you have more suggestions, definitely send them over. I'm all ears. But otherwise, I appreciate everybody tuning in today. And this was super fun. This just made my day. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day or a good evening, depending on your time zone. And I will see you in our next live stream.